That phileo, that Greek word, has as its meaning of this friendship, this kindred kind of friendship among friends, that love that friends have for each other. And one of the verses, I think, that just really captures that just in an amazing way is what the Apostle Peter wrote in 1 Peter 3, verse 8. And this is what he said: "Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another," there's that Greek word phileo, "be compassionate and humble." You know, when you look at that, when you look at those qualities of being like-minded, sympathetic, compassionate, and humble, who wouldn't want a friend like that, right? And so I think that really brings us then to the first fill-in that we're going to have for today, and that's this. God's desire for my friendship is that I receive physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual support. So God's desire is that I receive that physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual support, which, when you think about it, what that list that Peter gives there of sympathy and being like-minded and compassionate and humble, that meets these things, these supports that we need in our life. The reality is that we need support in all four of these areas in order to have overall good health and happiness. It's true. And it's rare to find someone who is able to support us in all four ways. It just is. It's very rare to do that. And if you do find somebody like that, guess what? Chances are, if you're married, they're your spouse. And chances are, if it's not your spouse, it's your best friend, right? One of the stories in the Bible that to me just stands out as just such an incredible example of a best friend scenario is that of David and Jonathan. They lived around 1000 BC. Jonathan happened to be the son of Israel's first king, a guy by the name of Saul. And Saul at first took a liking to David. He actually employed David as a musician in his household. And then David showed his amazing tactics in battle. And he was a fantastic warrior. He killed the giant by the name of Goliath with just a sling and a stone. He became a great leader in war. And unfortunately, as David's fame grew, so did Saul's jealousy of him. And so in 1 Samuel 19, we find that Saul then asked his son Jonathan to kill David. Now put yourself into Jonathan's shoes. Do I listen to my dad or do I defend my friend? Well, because of the fifth commandment, you shall not murder, he decided to defend his friend. And so he went to his dad and said, "Dad, what are you doing? This is an awful idea. David's a great warrior in your army. Why would you want to kill him?" And so anyway, so Jonathan put his life on the line, basically, because his dad could have killed him. Don't listen to me, fine, you're dead, right? So Jonathan displayed an amazing friendship to David. That physical support, the physical protection. And so you think about it, when we have friends like that, what a blessing they are. But also think about the emotional support that we need from our friends. Those people that we can be vulnerable with. Those people that we can trust with our information and share with them, yeah, I'm having a bad day. And we know that they're going to listen to us. They're going to love us. They're going to support us. And I just can't help but think of the incredible value that we have of having those kind of friends. And also the mental support. There's a Barna survey that just came out that says that 42% of Americans are struggling with anxiety, and they are seeing its impact in their relationships, their most important relationships in their life. That's almost 1 out of every 2 of us struggling with anxiety right now. Think about that. Not only that, but basically 39% are now saying that they're experiencing depression, which I think I told you this before. I suffered through a bout of depression about 2 months ago. It's awful. It's debilitating. It just leaves you feeling like, you know what? I'm no good to anybody. I'm just going to lay here in bed. And I did, until my wife got annoyed and said, get out of bed, But the thing is that we need that emotional and the mental support from our friends to be able to get through those hard times. And I just can't help but think of, a story. So I had a time when the spiritual support was so important for me as well. Sometimes people may think, oh, pastor, he's got his act together. He's good to go spiritually. You know what? We're just as simple as you. So I had a relationship that was a close family relationship. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I just got really frustrated with them because I was the one always having to pick up the phone to call them. They never called me. Can you relate? Every once in a while, there's a family member like that. And so I was the one to call them. And you know what? I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a little test here. I'm just going to see how long it takes before they call me. Well, like 4 months into it, I was miserable because I didn't get a call. And so my buddy, he gave me my spiritual support. He spoke truth into my life after listening to me vent about this. He spoke truth into my life, reminded me of God's calling for me. Remember, love one another. And he said, dude, why are you making yourself miserable and probably making them miserable? Call them. And so I did. And you know what? That relationship has never been better. All because my friend gave me that support I needed, especially the spiritual support, to listen and then speak God's truth into my life. Thank God for those friends. But maybe you're thinking right now, well, that's great for you, Pastor Chris. I don't have those kind of people in my life. Maybe you're struggling with that. And if you are, this is where we want to turn to what one of the wisest men on the face of this earth had to say, a guy by the name of Solomon. Now, Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. Solomon happened to be David's son. So he grew up in a household where David obviously appreciated friendship and probably taught Solomon to do the same. And what I find fascinating, if you've never read through the book of Proverbs, just how many of those wise sayings that Solomon puts in there that have to do with relationships. Relationships with God, relationships in marriage, relationships with family, relationships with friends. And one of the most formative, one of the most important verses in Proverbs that has to do with friendship is what we have here in Proverbs 13, verse 20. So let's take a look. Solomon wrote, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. The point that Solomon is making here is that unlike family, we actually have a choice when it comes to our friends. We do. I know, hate to break it to you, but you're born into the family you're born into, right? And that's not meant to be a negative thing, but the reality is that, yeah, we don't get to change families, right? However, we do have a choice when it comes to our friends. And so the question is, well, what kind of friends do I have? When it comes to those 4 supports that I talked about, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual support, how do my friends rank in what they provide for me in those 4 areas? And notice that Solomon here is saying, hey, walk with the wise and become wise. And so as we have friends, as we're looking for friends, we're looking for somebody who is going to be wise in how they give us the support that we need physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And what I find fascinating about that Hebrew word for wisdom, Solomon is known, one of his most famous quotes is, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? And so what's interesting is that when he says that wisdom has this picture of walking down the road and not deviating off course. So, staying on the straight and narrow, making godly, good choices. That's what the wisdom is. As opposed to, here he says that a companion of fools suffers harm. The fool is the one willing to take the side road. The fool is the one who's willing to lead you down the wrong choice, down the wrong path. And guess what? You get harmed. And so maybe, just maybe, you've been burned by one of those kind of friendships. I have. And so here's our next fill-in. Friendships often can get messy. I may be tempted to give up and be alone. But God wants me to connect with friends and be a wise influence. You know, what's so interesting about that word companion, a companion of fools suffers harm, it's actually a shepherding term. Surprise, surprise, because David was a shepherd before he became a king, so no wonder here. But it's a shepherding term. So in other words, a companion is somebody who grazes in the same pasture. So you put that in terms of friendship, that if we're just hanging out in the same group as someone who is a fool, as someone who's making those wrong, unwise, ungodly choices, you know what? There's a good chance you might suffer harm. You know, just a quick story. I'm full of stories, but just a quick story. So we had a young man in my former church who, he had a promising athletic career. He was a stud on the football field. And you know what happened is that one night he was out late with some buddies and they had a fool in their midst who was driving the vehicle. And they were driving well over 100 miles per hour down a country road at 2 a.m. and he didn't see the curve coming. And they flipped and rolled. And I mean, it is a miracle any of them survived. All of them survived. Now, if that doesn't show God's hand in things, I don't know what does. But here's the thing. Because of the fool's actions, that young man not only could never play again, but he spent the next 3 years enduring dozens of surgeries just to be able to walk again. Wow. And so again, a companion of fools suffers harm, right? But here's the thing we need to understand. I don't think any of us willingly chooses a fool for a friend, right? I just don't think that happens. But the reality is that there are certain times in our life where we may be more susceptible to that happening, where we just kind of wander into that friendship. And I think those times are those periods of transition. So for example, when somebody is transitioning from middle school to high school, or from high school to college, or from college out into the workforce, you get your own apartment, you're living in a new city, you're away from family. And when we go through those periods of transition, what happens? We experience a relational vacuum where things change. Yeah, we've got friends from before, we've got family and so on, but we experience this relational vacuum. And so we're searching for a place where we can belong, for a group where we can be accepted, where we can experience meaning and purpose in our life. And so all of these things are at play as we form these new friendships. And so because we're searching for those things, we may not be very in tune to the kind of choices or the kind of person, the kind of character that we're inviting into our lives as friends. And it's at those moments that, after time where that relationship then begins to come to fruition, that we begin to realize, oh, I can't trust this person with my most vulnerable thoughts because they've hurt me. They've used that information against me. Or I'm pouring into this relationship. I'm giving and giving and giving. And they were giving at first, and then they start taking and sucking the life out of the friendship. Have you been there? And those things wound us. And the temptation is to just be like, well, forget about relationships. I'm just better off alone. I'm better off with my 1,500 people on social media that I can interact with if I want to, but maybe because I don't want to, I'm just going to shut them down too. Sound familiar? But God reminds us it's not good to be alone. We need each other. We need friends. And in those moments, let's just remember that if we are feeling lonely, and again, the experts are saying due to COVID, it's getting worse within our culture, that in those moments where we're feeling alone, we're not truly alone. Our Lord Jesus is with us. He loves us. He wants what's best for us. And he promises to help us heal in those relational wounds that we've experienced, even at the hands of so-called friends. He promises to heal us. And I'm just going to offer to you just one really practical takeaway, one really practical next step for you is that if you are just kind of in that fog of being wounded by a friend right now, there is a fantastic 5-day Bible reading plan. It's a devotion plan on the YouVersion Bible app. You ready? It's called Time of Grace Friend Request. So if you look up Time of Grace and then Friend Request on the YouVersion Bible app, it is a fantastic thing. And what it does is that it kind of helps you go through and understand the ups and downs of friendship. And it reminds us of God's promise that he is our best friend. It is just a fantastic devotion. So Time of Grace, Friend Request. Now, that being said, remember that friendship is very much about influence. That another reason why God does not want us to be alone is because he wants us to be able to influence each other with the wisdom that God gives us. And what's so cool is that in our message prep, as we talked about this, that we discovered that the word for influence kind of has as its root meaning river. And so, just think about it. Rivers influence things, don't they? I mean, in the Midwest, it's not maybe as obvious because everything's green there. Out here, boy, you can tell where rivers are, can't you? Yeah, because the river influences, it brings life to the things around it as it waters it. But friendships can go one of two ways. They can either influence you positively and bring life to you and support to you, or they can suck it out of you. And I just picture yourself, kind of floating along the Salt River with a group of friends on the tubes, and, you're just enjoying the beauty of God's creation. And then you come around a corner and there's someone dumps a whole load of garbage into the river. What's your reaction? Like just repulsion, like, oh my goodness, And here's the thing. Sometimes foolish friendships, their influence is dumping garbage into the river. And so we want to remember that, hey, you know what? If that's happened to us, when we have wise friends who are there to give us the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual support, they can help us clean up that garbage out of our life. They can, and they will. Or we can also be that same kind of person who can influence people positively. And that brings us then to the next thought. If we look at the next proverb of how can we be a wise friend, this is what Solomon had to say in Proverbs 27, verse 17. He says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. I absolutely love this verse because of the visual that it gives. That if you've ever used a whetstone and sharpened a knife, you know that there is a part of a grinding off of the dull part that sharpens the knife once again. And of course, back in those days, they use iron on iron to do that, to be able to sharpen their weapons and make them useful again. And that's just a really powerful visual of how we are able to help each other in our friendships, to help each other just take off that dull part, the hurt part, the wounded part, to take off the part that's the frustrated part, the angry part, whatever it is in our relationship, and help us work through it. And here's how we can be a good friend. Ready? Here's the next fill in. So how do I maintain good friendships? Remember to be Christ-centered, available, reliable, and prayerful. And the next part of our fill in here is that a good friend helps my self-talk become God talk. So again, Christ-centered, available, reliable, prayerful. And then a good friend helps my self-talk become God talk. Now I want you just to think back, on let's put it this way. Everybody's life is centered around something. Isn't it true? Everybody's life is centered around something. And as people of God, as followers of Jesus, we want to keep our life centered on Jesus. Because remember back to John chapter 15, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that we have Jesus as the one who's the vine, we are the branches. As we connect to him, as we stay centered on him, he empowers us to be who we need to be for the friends around us. Because maybe you've heard this before. If you want to have good friends, be one, right? Well, it takes strength and effort to do that. And so as we center our lives on Jesus, he helps us. He gives us the strength to be who we need to be for each other. To be, and the next part of that, being Christ-centered, is to be available. I'm going to tell you right now, this is the one of all of these I probably struggle with the most. And my family would agree, my friends would agree, everybody who knows me would agree, because in order to be available, you need to create margin in your life. Maybe you've heard it said that if you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. Well, Dodo Bird here knows how to say yes to way too much, just saying. And so what happens is that if I say yes to this and this and this and this and this, I'm actually saying no to being available for my friends. And that also then hurts the next one, which is to be reliable, because I'll overcommit and then I end up having to say, you know what, I can't make it tonight. I want to help you move, but I can't make it. And so at that moment, I am not reliable, am I? I gave him my word, but I went back on it. Have you been there? It stinks. And so God reminds us, keep your word. Create enough margin so that you can be available and reliable. And then the final one, to be prayerful. Man, what a great way to be a good friend. That one of the things I love about our men's group right now is that, we've just got a lot of texting and sharing of different things that are people and things that we need to pray about. And we encourage one another, we lift one another up, but we're saying, hey, I'm praying for you. And sometimes, whatever the prayer request is, it's to such a degree that we pick up the phone and say, you know what, can I pray with you right now? It's an amazing encouragement and an amazing support to pray for one another. Because here's the reality, when those events happen in our life that are hard and difficult and that strain relationships, there's a whole lot of self-talk going on, right? It's those thoughts going on in your mind that just lead you down a very dark path. I mean, just case in point, this is just kind of a very simplistic version of this. But last night, I got a chance to preach at Midtown last night as well, which was awesome. But here's the thing. So on my way, imagine this, someone cut me off on the highway. Imagine that. And the reality is that at that moment, there was a whole lot of self-talk going on that I can't repeat in front of y'all. And the thing is that self-talk can oftentimes, it can take us to very dark places. And so isn't it great to have friends who can take us from that self-talk to God talk, to remembering who we are and whose we are, to remembering God's promises that he will never leave us, that he always loves us, that he always cares for us. Man, that's what we need. And now, right about now, you're probably thinking, yeah, that sounds awesome, but I don't always live up to that kind of friendship. I'm not even that kind of friend. And that's true. None of us are. None of us are perfect friends. None of us have perfect friends. And that's why we want to be reminded of the final set of verses that Jesus shares with us today. In John chapter 15, this is what Jesus has to say. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. And let's just get to our final fill in here. Jesus is the friend of sinners. He forgives my failures and empowers me to love my friends. So interesting, in the Bible, there are a couple of different times where Jesus is actually accused by the religious leaders of being a friend of sinners. One of the most powerful stories, one of the most powerful examples of that, I'm convinced, is in Luke chapter 19, where Jesus comes into Jericho. There's this short guy by the name of Zacchaeus who comes down and meets with Jesus. And Zacchaeus was filthy rich. He had it all. But he was bankrupt in his friendships. He had burned so many bridges relationally. I mean, to the point where because he was a tax collector and he was skimming off the top of what was supposed to be the taxes and taking everybody's money, he was shunned by the religious leaders. He couldn't even go into the temple. He couldn't even go to church if he wanted to. That's how bad he was. And then on top of that, he had burned all the bridges with his friends. He had no friends. And then Jesus comes along and invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. That was probably the first time in a long time that Zacchaeus actually had somebody in his home other than fellow tax collectors. And to think about it, that Jesus met him where he was at. Jesus loved him. Jesus extended compassion to him and changed Zacchaeus' eternity. And that's the thing. If Jesus was willing to be a friend with Zacchaeus, he's willing to be a friend with you. It doesn't matter what your past consists of. It doesn't matter what the regrets are, the broken friendships that you have, that you wish you could call up that friend that you hurt so deeply, but you know they would not even pick up the phone if they saw it was you. Jesus knows, and he loves you, and he went to the cross for you. He went to the cross for me because guess what? I burned those kind of bridges too. We're all in need of Jesus. And he died and he rose again to restore our relationship with him and to give us peace in those broken friendships that we've experienced. Man, thank you, Jesus. And here's the thing. I want you to, as we close out today, I want you to think about the fact that Jesus is the one who really teaches us to empower us to be able to love on our friends. He says here, you know what? A good friend is someone who's going to lay down their life for another friend. And Jesus lived by example, right? The very next day after he spoke these words, that's exactly what he did. Friendship involves sacrifice. It involves making deposits into the relationship. Picture your friendship like a bank account. That we make deposits every time we listen to one another, love one another, serve one another, pray for one another. We make deposits. So my challenge to you and to myself is this week. Who is one person on your mind right now that needs that deposit of Jesus' love? Pick up the phone, call them or text them, and ask them, how are you doing really? And that's a deposit. A little bit of the amazing deposit that Jesus gave to us when he deposited his love into our lives. Let's be that kind of friend. Amen.